And Raffaello Pantucci, Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, joins us live to speak more about this Russia-Ukraine crisis. Mr. Pantucci, thank you so much for joining us. Reports say Russian forces could reach the outskirts of Kyiv later today. How does this fit into Russian President Vladimir Putin's agenda?
I think that he's had a very clear plan for taking over Ukraine and was clearly, I think in the statements that he made after he recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as sort of former republics, we saw him moving quite rapidly to talking about going to defending them and going into some major operation into Ukraine to basically to take over the country. And so I think the target's always been going to Kyiv. I think it's a question of how long it's going to take him to get there.
Well, President Zelensky has vowed to stay in Kyiv. What options does he have at this point? Because he's been asking for help and aid from other nations. Everything seems to be quite silent at this point.
I think President Zelensky has quite bravely decided to stay and fight and support his people and be alongside them at this difficult moment. Frankly, his options are pretty limited. All he can really do is try to mobilize his army to fight back against the Russian aggression. And I think he's doing that. He has had support from abroad, but there's a limit to how much support he can get. I think as we've seen, Western powers are going to sort of pour scorn and rhetorical anger towards Russia and impose heavy sanctions, and I'm sure start to try to find ways of supplying more weapons to the Ukrainians. But at the moment, it's really a question of rallying Ukrainians to fight against the Russian invaders.
Now, speaking of sanctions, we are seeing sanctions all over globally, including Asia, mounting on Russia. But President Zelensky says it's not enough. And at this point, what do you think can stop Mr. Putin? Can anything eventually stop him?
I don't think so. I think at this point, he's in for a penny, he's in for a pound. At this point, he's set out quite clearly his goal from the outset. He's gone in to do it. Frankly, he's going to suffer the consequences of sanctions and everything else from the world anyway. Why hesitate? Why stop? Why not go all the way at this point? So, no, I think at this point, President Putin has set himself on a very clear path, and I don't think he's going to be dissuaded from that. I think the only thing that might potentially hold things up would be if the Ukrainian forces demonstrate an ability to really, hold back the Russian army, and we start to see very severe casualties and penalties being imposed on Russian forces. But I don't think that would stop him. I think it would just slow down his timeline. But I think at this point, frankly, the die is cast.
Well, as Russia and the West face off on Ukraine at this particular crucial point, what role do you think China and India play? Because these two globes, largest emerging powers, they have been quite silent. Do they have any sway with Russia?
I mean, they have a huge amount of sway with Russia, and in a way, it's one of the more depressing elements of this entire. Well, there's many, many sad elements of this entire moment. In particular, the suffering of the people of Ukraine who are suffering under war once again. But I think the fact that we've seen China and Russia, two of Russia's biggest allies on the world stage, both members of BRICS, both members of the Russia-India-China grouping, both members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all very strong allies and who work very closely with Russia. Both of them have offered, frankly, fairly blank responses on the world stage. China has leaned in quite strongly to support Russia and has in fact condemned what the United States has been doing, while India has frankly refused to particularly condemn, has instead said, called for, cessation of violence and a desire for everyone to sort of be peaceful once again, which is frankly what everyone wants. But these are two powers that have a very strong relationship with Moscow, a very long historical relationship with Moscow, who I think if they were to sort of apply their pressure alongside everybody else, I think we could see the Russians finding themselves in a situation that they might have to think a little bit more about what was going on. I think at the moment, the fact that Russia can go forwards, against the West that it knows is always going to be against it, but still find it has very strong allies on the world stage like China, like India, then I think you're going to see President Putin feel quite strengthened and quite confident in what he wants to do.
Now, for weeks, we've been seeing leaders have been trying to dissuade Russia from taking, military action. Is the road to diplomacy now closed? Do you see chances of a peaceful resolution?
I think at this point, the resolution will come once, frankly, the Russians have completed the operation they've gone they've gone in that they want to do. I think at that point, I'm sure we will see some sort of government emerge, whether it is, the remnants or President Zelensky's government sort of rising once again, or some new government that's been installed by Moscow. But I think that's the moment at which we will see a sort of cessation in hostilities. I think at this point, the Russians have gone in. At this point, President Putin has very little incentive, frankly, to return to the negotiating table until he's completed what he wants to do in Ukraine, which seems quite clearly to be the destruction of Ukraine's military capabilities and essentially the dismemberment of the country.
Now, thank you so much for those insights. That was Raffaella Pantucci from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies.